Welcome everyone for this amazing panel discussion for Amudim, a very important organization that is doing incredible work all across North America. I am honored to be able to be here today with Rabbi Jacobson, Ms. Allison Josephs, and Rabbi Yakov Horowitz. Each one of them is doing incredible work in the area of outreach and helping especially Jews who have felt disenfranchised and estranged from Orthodox Judaism. I welcome Rabbi Yakov Horowitz, who is the founding dean of Yeshiva Darchei Noam of Monsey, and also the director of Bright Beginnings. We welcome Rabbi Jacobson, who's a prominent rabbi and speaker in New York, and Ms. Allison Josephs, the founder and director of Jew in the City and of Project Makom. Welcome. It's wonderful to be able to see you all, and thank you for working together and coordinating your schedules for Amudim.
Thank you.
We are going to be speaking a little bit about, over the next few minutes, we're going to be speaking about the whole phenomenon that unfortunately has not gotten better. If anything, perhaps COVID has exacerbated this issue. The issue of many of our youth leaving the fold of Orthodox Judaism, of leaving Frumkeit, and going in different directions. And many parents are very distraught over this. Communities are distraught over this. And we're all seeking to be part of some kind of way of addressing the issue. And so I'd like to ask each and every one of you, from your experience, what are some of the root causes of children, for lack of a better term, going off the derech today? Is it even fair to bunch all those who leave our communities into one group? I'd like to ask Rabbi Jacobson if you wouldn't mind commenting first.
As you said accurately, I think it would be very unfair and difficult to put them all into one group. But I think it's important to point out some, at least some, and I'm sure my esteemed colleagues can elaborate or point actually to other elements. I think one major component has to do with sexual molestation. Even if it's not so dramatic. In my eyes or in your eyes, it may not be dramatic, but the question is the experience of the child, the boy or the girl, which can create tremendous internal dysfunction. And sometimes the parents don't know about it. They're clueless. The child himself or herself doesn't know how to process it. And by the time they reach a level of maturity where their bodies change, things in their brain become transformed dramatically. And the way they look at themselves is changed forever. As a result, their relationship to their friends, to their teachers, to Hashem, to Judaism, to their parents, to the community, to the family. This itself can happen from one extreme to another extreme. But this is very, very serious. It's very, very acute. But there is molestation of different forms. Dysfunction, trauma, abuse, internal anxiety that creates situations that don't have to do with Judaism. They don't have to do with Yiddishkeit. They don't have to do with Shabbos or Yom Tif or Tefillin or davening or a relationship with Hashem or Torah and mitzvahs in general. But because the person is broken inside, they somehow cannot adjust or they cannot live up to the standards, or they blame. It becomes a smokescreen and many other factors. So I think that is one major source.
Thank you. Ms. Josephs?
Yeah, so I would totally agree that a lot of what we see at Project Makom is trauma-based, a high percentage of sex abuse. I won't speak for people that don't come to our organization because I can't claim to know the entirety of this phenomenon, but certainly the people that we see and people that don't come to our organization, but people within our organization that have told me about some of their friends that have chosen to not stay within Orthodoxy because our group is trying to come to terms with their Judaism. In addition to the trauma, I would say the box being too small. I would say no room for questions being asked. I would say not just the learning about a fear of God, but a terror of God. Almost to the point that I've seen a lot of our members, almost like their Bechira has been removed from them. They are so just completely scared out of their minds about what might happen if they were to deviate. And yet doing mitzvos is so painful to them. So really lots of different levels of trauma, whether it's the sort of most obvious of the sex abuse kind, or what I've learned now over the years, not making room for the child to be able to say their real thoughts, to be able to have their real feelings, to not have a place to like be hugged and kissed and feel nurtured, both physically and an emotional nurture. So there's sort of many levels and layers of that. And we see, you know, it's obviously not all cases in the homes. There's sometimes abuse outside of the homes, but a lot of times the person's relationship to their parents is how they relate to God. And so if they see their parents as harsh and full of judgment and not full of love, then they see, you know, Hashem that way as well. And so it's really along the same lines of you know, the trauma idea.
Thank you, Rabbi Horowitz.
I absolutely concur with Rabbi Jacobson and Ms. Joseph. I like to think of it in really in two buckets, in two separate categories. And this is how I've been thinking about it and responding to it for almost 25 years now. There's ozvim et hadat, children or adults who abandon religion only. And then it's ozvim et hachayim, that are leaving life. And I think it's important for parents and educators to understand the difference between them and be able to help diagnose it a little better. So ozvim et hadat means that you have an adolescent or a young adult who's in college and school. They have friends, they have a social life, they're happy, they're looking forward. You know, the gears are moving forward. Just God's not part of that. So I think of that as ozvim et hadat. I think there are many different reasons. I'll share a few with you. I did many surveys over the past 23 years with youngsters who, you know, exit interviews to find out and what their opinion is. And it usually was not exactly what the adults think it is. But ozvim et hachayim is what, you know, when you see kids who are not functioning, they're not happy, they're not moving forward. They're really abandoning life. I felt for many years now that it's way over 90%, close to very, very high percentage is trauma related. So, and on the other hand, the ozvim et hadat, the kids who are abandoning religion, the top answers that I've gotten, it's been almost consistent over 20 years. Some of them have questions of faith. Some of them actually, it's not that they're leaving, they were never in. You know, it's not that they're abandoning religion, it's that they were never sold. You know, we make a mistake when we have for 5-year-olds coming into our school, we assume that they're customers. And all you got to do is just cover ground with them. And I think many of them just weren't sold in the first place. They're just not convinced. It could be a faith issue. It could be other things. A lot of the kids, it's just not yet. Meaning they plan on settling down and leading religious lives. At 17, they're just not interested yet. Like I have some analogies. I don't want to go into all of it now, but I found a significant percentage of the kids, if you ask them, even while they're abandoning religion and not keeping Shabbos or whatever, if you ask them where would you want to send your kids to school, very often it might be 2 clicks to the left of the parents. But they eventually want to settle down. They're just not ready yet. And I think inflexibility on the part of parents, that meaning that you have a child that's clearly not cut out for X and you give them Z or Y, and it's just being rigid with them and saying that everybody's got to be doing the same thing. Poor parenting, not being able to effectively parent the challenging child. There's nothing in anyone's life that prepared them to dealing with a teenager who's having a difficult time. So I think inconsistencies, by the way, was a big one. That they, no society is perfect. They see inconsistencies among the adults, and you hear about that a lot when you talk to them. So again, I think there are two groups, Ozumet HaChayim, Ozumet HaDat, and I think it's really important that we really reflect on what the issues are and how to remediate them, how to fix them.
Thank you to each one of you. I just wanted to reflect, each one of you has commented to one degree or another on root causes of why some people leave the frum community. And each one of you points to some kind of either trauma or something dysfunctional going on in the upbringing of the young man or the young woman. And I want to provoke you for just a moment, and perhaps you can engage each other in this idea. Is it possible that there are certain people who are brought into this world who simply are not meant to fit into the frum world? In other words, even if a child had an idyllic upbringing in the most loving, caring family, the best school, the best education, is it possible that even such a child would leave the faith simply because they are themselves a free spirit? And in particular, this would lead us to, if the answer is yes or no to this question, it would lead us to come up with different strategies. Let me just give you an example. How should a family deal with a family member who has left Yiddishkeit? And there's always that concern that this young man or young woman is going to be a negative impact upon the other siblings that are around the Shabbos table. And how do we deal with that person? Does that person deserve to be distanced from the family? Or should there be a space carved out for that individual around the Shabbos table, even if they're not Shomer Torah mitzvahs? And to extend that even further, what about an entire community? Does an entire community make space for someone who's not from, or to what degree should that person be distanced from the community? To what extent should we be working on bringing those disaffected people back into Yiddishkeit versus trying to find a place for the non-observant Jew within a Torah community? And are there sufficient types of orthodoxy today to accommodate everyone who doesn't find themselves fitting into that? I think Ms. Josephs talked about the box being too small. So these are issues that we say are bigadol. So if you wouldn't mind going first, please let us know your thoughts.
So number one, it's possible that there's someone that could be born and just wasn't meant to fit into the frum world. I haven't met that person yet, but it's possible that person exists. So I think that would be foolish to say that that isn't possible. This is my sense, even for my own children. Some of my kids, well, all my kids are questioning. All my kids have, big questions, philosophical questions. But I see for one of my kids right now, they're in the middle of a lot of questions right now, and sometimes they don't feel like davening. But the way that they talk about themselves, it's like being Jewish is so part of who they are because they love where they come from. They love their family. They love what they're part of. And it's just so embedded in who they are that it's hard to imagine that there would be a break there. Now, is it possible for someone? I can't say that it's not possible, but my sense is that if you love who you are and where you come from, you want to continue that. In terms of should we distance ourselves from people who have left as a family, as a community? No, we should not. We should love our fellow Jew. We should love our family members, our children unconditionally. We should not try to parent other adults. When someone is an adult, God gave them bechira, and it's up to them to use. And people write to us sometimes and tell us at Project Makom, I have this relative or this friend, who's OTD, can you reach out to them? And we always tell them, no, we don't do recruitment. We are here for the people that are looking for what we have to offer. So the question is, what can you do? You can be a great example of a Torah observant Jew. You can be, put out loving kindness. You can be a walking Kiddush Hashem. You can be a person that engages in complicated questions and complex answers and makes room for different opinions. And maybe that will be appealing to the person that has left, and maybe it won't, but ultimately it's their decision. And I think I mean, look, I was raised sort of with a fiddler on the roof type of idea, non-observant, but like if we intermarry, my parents would sit Shiva, even though they fed us, cheeseburgers. But I don't think that that's where the world can be today. I think we have to, make the tent much bigger, let people make their own decisions, and really embody what Torah Jews are and give people the space to come back should they want to.
Thank you, Rabbi Horowitz.
So I definitely think that there are children, it's basically really small adults, they have a certain personality package that they're just contrarians, that they just, they challenge whatever they're learning. Whatever it is that they're around, they're just challenging. So, and you asked if it comes from a perfect family. I've been dealing with a fantastic rabbi who has a beautiful family life. He has a number of children, and there's one of them that's just challenging. Every parsha, he calls me up, every parsha that the kid has like complaints, like social justice type complaints. What's with this karbanos, and how could Avram throw a kid out of the house? And he's just tearing his hair out. And I told him, I said, I think your kid has a hachal neshama. He has an elevated neshama. I said, it's not phony. He really feels this way. And he's expressing himself in ways that are challenging. And sometimes, you can't say that adults don't have these questions also. So I think there's a group of people that I wouldn't say that they're not meant to belong in the frum world. We have to be more tolerant and give them space. That's what I meant about being rigid. I was on a panel with Rabbi Ozeri from the Syrian community in Brooklyn, at an Aguda convention Friday night. It was in the late 90s. And we were talking about teens at risk. And it was Friday night, we weren't being recorded, so we were able to be more candid. And he got up, he said something so fascinating. He said, look, folks, he's talking to everybody. He said, look, folks, I'm not going to tell you that we don't have problems with our children. Of course we do. Everybody does. He said, the one thing we don't have is this stigma thing. We don't put our children in boxes, like as Ms. Joseph said. We don't put them in boxes. He said that, we said, we have a Beit Knesset. They have a shul. Everybody's welcome. If somebody's not observant and comes in and wants to pray for 10 minutes and walks in with clearly coming in off the street, he's welcome. He sits next to the rabbi. Nobody bats an eyelash. He said, we don't have this. We don't have these gradations, and we don't have these boxes that we put people in, so that they have a more difficult time if they're not conforming to exactly the way their family or their community is used to. So and my response to him was that I said, you didn't have the Haskalah, you didn't have the Enlightenment period, and that I think that did make us more wary of change and more when a child asks a question or refuses to do certain parts because they don't mean anything to him or her, we tend to extrapolate that they're not interested in religion, or they're going to wind up being non-religious completely, when maybe it's just a phase, or maybe it's something they need to talk about, or maybe it's something that really that is questionable. I mean, how many of us read through Amalek and like, oh, okay, these are legitimate questions, and our greatest leaders had issues of faith, why bad things happen to good people, or vice versa. So I think to allow children, especially teenagers, to be able to talk candidly, to be able to ask their questions, like the seminaries do in Israel, right? Especially the girls' seminaries, they went for 12 years to Beis Yakov, where they would basically, taught, and then the teacher says you can ask anything you want, and they're not. We had 3 daughters who went through they're just not accustomed to that type of thinking. So I think that's just an important piece of it.
Thank you. And Rabbi Jacobson, please.
Thank you for the beautiful, I think, and extraordinary, relevant, and powerful insights. I don't want to repeat what my esteemed colleague said, because you heard it, and we all should internalize their precious words. I would just maybe emphasize a few points and additional points. Number one, sometimes you have extraordinary parents and beautiful homes and beautiful families who do, quote unquote, everything right. and yet the apple falls far from the tree. And as one of the great rabbis said, apples don't fall far from the tree when there's a regular weather outdoors. But when there's a thunderstorm, then apples sometimes fall far from the tree. So sometimes parents right away blame themselves. You know, it's our fault, it's my fault. Maybe they're right, maybe they're completely wrong. That doesn't help to blame yourself. It's very painful. You need a good support system. When you have such a child or such children, you need to be vulnerable. You need to learn to cry. You need to learn to laugh. And most importantly, the marriage has to be strong, because it's the marriage, when there's a good, powerful marriage, that can carry a family, and it can ultimately help that child and help the father and mother and the other siblings. So I would always encourage you, focus on your marriage. And very often, problems in the marriage subconsciously affect the children very deeply. Sometimes it's not a child issue, it's a parent issue. Sometimes it's not. So everything could look wonderful on the outside. Don't blame. Ask yourself, what does Hashem want from me right now? Number two, every neshama has its journey. Bal yidach b'menu nidach, the pasuk says in Shmuel Beis. The Shalah writes, many of the greatest Kabbalists and mystics and rabbis write, every neshama ultimately is a chelik elekam imal. It's divine, it's sacred. So the question is not if they're going to come back. In a way, they're never separated. Bonim atem lashem alekechem. There's nothing I can do to sever the cord with my child. The halacha is bein kach ubein kach atem kruyim bonim. So the relationship is always there. You have to believe in it. Believe in those children. Believe in their souls, even if the journey is painful and difficult. And I would also emphasize something that the Stipler Gon, Zechet Tzadik Levracha, once shared with Rabbi Yankele Galinsky. I thought it was a very moving insight. I said it not long ago at the Torah Masorah convention, one of the Torah Masorah conventions. The Stipler said to him, a fascinating insight. It says that Yakov, Rashi brings, Yakov crossed the Jordan River, Kibemakli Avarti Sayardin. He ran away from Esav, and he only had a stick. His father couldn't give him anything else, a couple of dollars, talis and tefillin, nothing else. He had a lot of things. He had a lot of wealth. But Eliphaz, the son of Esav, pursued Yaakov to kill him because Esav wanted Yaakov dead. But Rashi says, Lefisha gadal b'cheikoi shel Yitzchak, because Eliphaz grew up in the bosom of his Zayda Yitzchak, therefore he couldn't get himself to murder Yaakov. Instead, Yaakov told him, take my money, and a poor man is like chashav kameis, is like lifeless. He gave him a shir Masechta Nedarim, daf chaf ani chashav kameis, and Yaakov remained alive. That's why he was broke. So the Stipler said, let's think about this. Yitzchak knew that Yishmael was thrown out of the house because of him. Sarah wanted it, and Hashem told Avram, listen to Sarah. You always listen to your wife. Here he had an Esav. Throw him out of the house. At least his grandson, Eliphaz, the pasuk defines in Vayishlach, was engaged in the most heinous, immoral, promiscuous acts. You could learn the Rashis at the end of Vayishlach. I won't elaborate. Every level of incest was in Eliphaz's life, in his biography. His resume was quite rich with immorality. Mela Esav is your child, but your grandchild, throw him out of the house. Eliphaz remained in the bosom of Yitzchak. Said the Stipler, you would think it was inconsequential. Yitzchak was maybe a nice man. He kept the anacle there. Stipler says no. Because of that, Yaakov was not killed, which means all of Klal Yisrael, every Jew living today, we can have a program today and sit and learn and grow together because Yitzchak made sure to hold on tight to Eliphaz. You don't sever your cord with your child.
A generation or two ago, it really was common for families to circle the wagon if the child abandoned religion, thinking that it's going to affect the other family members. Thankfully, the vast majority of families are not doing that anymore. And I have not found it to be contagious, where other children catch it, so to speak, and become abandon religion because of another sibling. There may be some things in the home that cause the first child to go out that aren't being addressed. But I haven't found it to be, to directly correlate. I think the best thing parents can do, like Rabbi Jacobson was saying, was talking about family units and marriages, and to sit down with, to sit down with the child and say, look, we love you unconditionally. This is a journey. We're here for you. You can talk to us about anything. And we're with you. And everybody says, so what do you tell the other kids? So my feeling is, first of all, if you abandon the child because they leave religion, what does that say about religion? And you're telling all the other children that my love for you is conditional on you keeping Torah and mitzvahs. So what kind of love is that? But I think I advise parents to tell the other children, look, Rivki, Yitzi is going through a tough phase right now, and it's difficult for us, but we're going to close an eye because that's what we're supposed to do, because we're a family. I was at a recovery retreat in Boca Raton run by a wonderful Chabad Shliach. It was a few years ago, and you never, all the people there were addicts, and you never ask who you hear. Of course, it's completely confidential. You don't say anything, but there was an entire table of about, I would say probably 20 people, all Hasidish, but genuine, real Hasidim, and there were 3 generations. There were like grandparents and 30-somethings and some grandchildren. And of course, I didn't say anything, but I walked by the table, and one of the young ladies, a daughter-in-law there, she said, you're probably wondering what we're all doing here. We're not all addicts. she said they had a brother there who was struggling with addiction. It so happened he wasn't religious, and very visibly so. He was the only one in his family. And this woman said it was remarkable. I asked her if I could come join the table. I sat there for an hour just talking to the people there, to the family. But they said, Mizenena mishpucha, we're a family. This is what families do. And they sent the message to this kid. Kaviyachal, it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ime Anochi B'tzara Kaviyachal, whatever, however you understand this, that Hashem goes to Golus with us. And I was so, I'm moved now, a few years later. It was so moving when they said this. And they just said it matter-of-factly. This is what families do. And I would certainly say, for so many different reasons, first of all, practically speaking, and giving the right message to the rest of the family, all we know that the best results happen when parents do this. I would just encourage, if anybody wants to read this, there's just a remarkable article written by the son of Ila Wiesel, Elisha. Have any of you seen the piece?
Yeah.
It's called Just Be. He writes about I'm going to lose it again, about his rebellion and how his father dealt with it. And it should be a must read for every single parent. It was in the Jewish Week. If you just look up Elisha Wiesel, Eli rebellion, and it'll come right up. And he said that he said specifically, I rebelled against my parents and I didn't want to listen. And his father just said, just be, meaning, I love you. I'm sorry. The amazing part of that piece is his father had died. He wrote it on the first yahrzeit of his father. And he says that how it motivated him to move closer to religion, be more spiritual because of his father's love for him. And he told the story of a friend of his, a female woman, who went to an Ivy League school, and she was a fantastic student, that her parents never had enough. It was always another degree and another this, that they always were disappointed with what she had and how it affected her later in life. Sorry, I lost it.
Thank you, Rabbi Yanki. That was beautiful. But we have this whole history, as you pointed out, and it goes back far beyond the 19th century with the Haskalah, of sitting Shiva for children who became Mishumadim, or, that's the old-fashioned way of saying that they left Yiddishkeit. And so what each one of you has reflected upon how logical it is to only embrace the child who has left Yiddishkeit even more. And yet we have this historical backdrop of distancing ourselves for self-preservation, to be able to, like you said, Rabbi Horowitz, to circle the wagons. So how do we balance that? And what has changed? What has changed in the 21st century that gives us license to be able to look back on our past and say, that was then, but it doesn't work anymore, and this is now? Can you reflect on that, please?
So as I'm hearing about these parents loving the children unconditionally, which is gorgeous, I'm thinking about the scene in the Netflix movie Unorthodox, where the main character is given a gun and basically told, you know, take care of yourself, like we don't want you here. And we have members who said they've been explicitly told by their parents, like, I wish you would just kill yourself. So, I mean, it's obviously like horrifying. And, you know, how do you sort of come back when the people that were brought you here, that were supposed to sort of hold you and love you your whole life, don't want you because you haven't ended up the way they want you to? And by the way, the people coming to us are looking for religion still. So they're still even trying to be observant, but not in the exact mold their parents want. But I think we've made a lot of progress in mental health understanding. We have more of an understanding now of sex abuse than we did, you know, a long time ago. We have more of an understanding of suicide, of all different mental health issues. And I think it's actually the Torah way is using the best science and medicine of the times to, you know, reflect how we make piskei halacha. So while we may have thought in previous generations that the safest thing was to circle the wagons and push away, you know, the kid that left, it's the question that comes up during the Seder. It's sort of an uncomfortable question. We made a mock Seder for our Project Mako members who were in solid, you know, staying alone during coronavirus. We filmed a Seder ahead of time that they could play before Yansif began. And we were thinking, like, how do we deal with, you know, the child that doesn't want to be a part of the nation anymore? But because we've made now a lot of progress in understanding just the human psyche, I think it is so clear that it's the right thing to do. And it is also, it happens to be an effective way, because the pushing away, I don't think that ever leads anyone back. And I don't think it should be sort of so goal oriented that, oh, if I do this thing and sort of act like I love them, maybe I'll get what I want. No, you should act the right way and love unconditionally, because that is the right thing to do. And additionally, it may be the most helpful way for the child to return.
Thank you. Rabbi Jacobson, do you want to reflect on that further?
Yeah, I would just make I'd make three I think important points. Number one, I just think as my esteemed colleagues spoke about the importance of the connection and the attachment and the love, but let's not confuse that. You have to know who the child is. Sometimes a certain structure and discipline and challenging the child may be very, very healthy and productive. Sometimes it could be a disaster. If I'm demanding my child to run a marathon and God forbid both of his legs are broken, it's abusive, it's torture. But if I'm challenging my child to be able to bring out inner potential that exists, but he or she may need that healthy structure, don't be afraid of that if your child needs that. Love does not mean there's no structure and there's no discipline. Depends what age, depends if there's trauma, there's no trauma, depends what the circumstances are. And it's very important to have a good and healthy support system. Not every therapist gets it. He may be a great therapist. He may not understand your child. He may not understand the circumstances. Make sure, go get help, advice, but make sure the advice resonates. Make sure it's effective. If somebody is giving you advice and the relationship is deteriorating and the house is becoming even more catastrophic and there's no light at the end of the tunnel, you got to change the doctor. You got to change the prescription. Don't become subservient completely and lose your personality. Mama knows best. Daddy knows best if they're healthy people. I'm not talking about if they're abusive and they themselves maybe have to be incarcerated. That's number one. Another important point I should just say is as follows. If you study, and I am quite an assiduous student of this literature, the entire literature of the early Hasidic movement, the Baal Shem Tov, who was born in 1698, that's exactly the time that the Enlightenment began. The language of Judaism in all of the literature of the Baal Shem Tov and all of his students throughout the generations, even though many Hasidim don't know this, was completely directed on the unconditional relationship that God has with every soul and that we have to have with ourselves and with our children and with every Jewish soul. So you're talking about 300 years ago. Did we always follow it? I don't think we always followed it. And I'm not here to judge anybody, but sometimes, remember, people worship religion instead of God. If I am a very frum person, I can become intoxicated by religion instead of Hashem. Hashem has no image. So when my child is not living up to my standards, I have to go deep into myself and be introspective and ask myself, is my disappointment here because of the neighbors, the family, the reputation, the shidduchim, the image, or my expectations of what I wanted to have in order to feel good about myself and my nachas? Or maybe it's time for me to transcend my ego and realize that I am a messenger of Hashem to take care of this neshama, to take care of this soul. This is a very deep, painful, introspective process that we have to do. When we throw people away and we negate them, it looks sometimes holy, but sometimes it's coming from a deep ego where I'm not in tune with what Hashem really wants from me as a father or as a mother at this moment. And finally, the last point I would mention is, and I don't mean to invoke this lightly, but it has a lot, I think it's important to mention the Holocaust. The Holocaust was a unique phenomenon in history. It targeted not religious Jews, not rabbis, not tzaddikim, not Rosh Yeshivas, them too. It targeted every Jew, including an atheist, a left-wing socialist, communist, agnostic, anti-religious, anti-Jewish. You know, half the Jews who died in the Holocaust, I don't know if it's half or a little less, whatever the number is, many of them, or a huge amount of them, have not been involved in Judaism, quite to the contrary. And yet, the hatred to them was identical, like the venom and the hatred to the holiest, greatest, most righteous, religious, observant, mystical tzaddik, or Rebbe, or Rosh Yeshiva. And I think it taught us one of the profoundest lessons about the Jewish people. And that is, if Hitler was ready to hunt down every single Jew in hate, no matter right-wing, left-wing, religious, secular, liberal, conservative, believer, non-believer, our duty in our generation is to hunt down every single Jew in love, regardless of their circumstances, the background, the affiliation, or the way they seem today externally, believing in that eternal kedusha and holiness that exists in every neshama.
Thank you. Each and every one of you, Baruch Hashem, has a steady flow of traffic to your email inbox, to your phone. And there are very, very conscientious and loving parents out there who are seeking out organizations like Amudim, which is doing an outstanding job in what it does as well. And each and every one of you is working towards those same goals. What would you say to a parent or a family member who is watching this and is just feeling too ashamed or too stigmatized, like Rabbi Jacobson was referring to? They're worried about the shidduchim. They're worried about the bad name that the family might acquire. What words of advice, or chizuk actually, can you offer to a family member who sees one of their children or siblings in tremendous pain and turmoil, and yet doesn't feel that they don't feel the strength that they need to be able to stand up and say, I need help?
So I usually, I tell parents, you know, you said a little bit provocative. Sometimes, depending on the situation, but often I'll tell parents that if they make decisions that are not in the child's best interest because they're worried about being embarrassed, which is absolutely normal, and we're all humans and we live in a fishbowl and all of that. But if they're making decisions because they're getting embarrassed, my chas v'shalom, many or most times they wind up getting much more embarrassed about much bigger things later on. That the child is dressing a little bit inappropriately or doing some things that are, you know, pushing the limits, and the parents clamp down, and they wouldn't if they lived on a farm. You know, I asked parents, imagine you lived on a farm by yourself. Would you say something about this? or is it only because you're understandably embarrassed about the others? But it usually works that they wind up they get more embarrassed for bigger things later on. And the kids, by the way, the kids very much respect that the parents are closing an eye. They get it, and it only makes them feel more positive towards religion. I just wanted to say something, Rabbi Warwai. Let me tell you what a cover it is to be with all three of you. Really, it's such a pleasure. On the first point you said about changing therapists, I absolutely agree, 100%. You said about, I remember the exact words you used, but you said very well that you should trust their instincts, right? What were the words you used? Something like that, right?
I said, Mama knows best.
Mama knows best, right? And trust your instincts. But I just want to...
Not always, I guess. Not always.
What?
But, not always. But
yeah, there's none of what we're saying. All four
it has
of
to
us,
resonate. You have to feel that the advice is healthy.
But I just want to point a message to parents whose kids are struggling. And I'm not disagreeing with what you said, Rabbi Wyrie. I'm just offering a different perspective on it. I was at a wedding of a very contrarian kid a number of years ago, and I've been coaching the parents literally for 10 years, and they really were model parents. They closed an eye to so many things, and Baruch Hashem, the kid got married. I just happened to see him earlier this week with a child, Baruch Hashem, wheeling a carriage. So a number of people in the audience had adolescents. It was very interesting response, and they right after the chuppah, I got a bracha at the chuppah, but they knew from their friends that I've been coaching the parents, and they came over and they said, Rabbi Horowitz, fast, regalachas, what did you do? What did you do? How'd you do this? Not me, it wasn't me, the parents did. So I told them, I said, I never talk about any individual children, but I just want to tell you one thing, that when you get good advice to close an eye, and all the things that the four of us would tell parents to do, very often the first year, 2 or 3, it gets worse, not better right away. In other words, the children are doing level X or whatever. They're 3 clicks away from their family. Now the parents sit down with the child and they go to someone, one of us, a therapist or whomever, and they find out what works, and they do the hard work, and they sit down and they say, look, sweetheart, we're with you. You have our unconditional love. At that point, very often the child says, okay, I only did 3 clicks because I was afraid of getting thrown out of the house. Now that my parents are cool with it, so they go 5 clicks away. I've noticed this hundreds of times, literally hundreds of times. And the parents come back and they say, Rabbi Horowitz or Ms. Joseph or Rabbi Jacobson or Rabbi Korobkin, we're doing what you said, and it's so much worse. They're just flagrantly doing it right in front of us. They were listening, and that's part of it. So I just want to, again, mother knows best, Rabbi Jacobson, and I agree with what you said there, but I think parents should know that very often when they do what needs to be done, and the incredibly difficult part of doing this, don't expect instant results. Quite to the contrary, usually gets worse for a little bit. And then when they're ready, then it starts coming back together.
I just want to add, beautifully said, Rabbi Yankee, thank you, and all the panelists. I would just add, I think, one important point. A Jew told me, he's a very prominent Jew, a very special person. He told this to me today, literally, mamish 2 hours ago. He has 8 children. 6 of them could not go through what you would call the mainstream yeshiva system. They could not. They could not be successful. They could not find satisfaction. And they ended up leaving the system, struggling with Yiddishkeit. And he told me that he was once speaking to the Mashgiach of Lakewood, Hagon HaTzadik Reb Matisyahu Solomon Shlita, who should be Shever Refuah Shleimo Kreva. And he told me, Reb Matisyahu looked at me. He was a mentor, he's a mentor of his, a Rebbe of his. And he told him these words. He said, if I was God, Reb Matisyahu said to this Jew, He said, if I was God, if I was the Rebbeinu Shalom, I would send you and your wife all these types of souls. I would not send you a soul that can go through the system. I would never do it if I was God. You know why? Because I know you are a trusted shliach. You and your wife will fulfill the mission that I need you to fulfill for these neshamas. And of course, he said, I was thinking thanks, but no thanks. But then we both had a chuckle. Now, I don't think he was being dismissive of the pain. It's very, very painful, my dearest friends. It's very painful. We have Mesiras Nefesh to inculcate in our children Yira Shamayim, Avos Hashem, Avos HaTorah, Avos Yisrael, to be Erlich Yidden. It's the blessing, the wish of every mother when she lights candles and sheds tears that her children should grow up to be proud Jews permeated with love of God and love of humanity and love of Torah. And then the dream shatters. It's very, very painful. And it's at this point I share with all of you, myself and all of us, we have to make a metamorphosis, a spiritual metamorphosis, and ask not what God can do for you, but ask what you can do for God. It's not anymore about satisfying my community, the uncles, the aunts, the shidduchim, fitting in. It's much deeper than that. Hashem has given you these souls who are struggling. He entrusted these souls with you. Fasten the seatbelt and go on this journey with pain, but with dignity, with resilience, with fortitude, with wisdom, and with a lot of compassion to yourself, to the child, and with a lot of love.
Thank you. That was beautiful, beautiful sentiments. The last question that I have for each of you, and again, with tremendous gratitude to Amudim and to each and every one of you for giving of your time for this important discussion. Ms. Josephs touched on it, that we are living during a pandemic, which we, Be'ezrat Hashem, hope that will be over very soon with the vaccine, and that, God willing, by this time next year, it'll all be a memory. But how has this affected? I mean, there are articles I've seen coming from Eretz Yisrael discussing how the closure of our yeshivas and our shuls to one degree or another has really contributed to young people leaving the fold and just going on their own way. And I'm just wondering if you can reflect on that and how, even amidst the pandemic, we can keep our children loved and close to the Ribbon Shalom. Please, if you could.
First of all, I completely concur with that. The corona has been a big nisayon and a big challenge. And I have to say, you know, as much as I am a fan, all of us, you know, care first and foremost about pikuach nefesh, which is the health, the considerations of health. We also have to realize the other side. And that is that having the kids, the boys and the girls, the teenagers, the bochum, the girls quarantined, posed and poses tremendous psychological, emotional, social, spiritual, and physical challenges. The biggest issue that I see is the technology. Everybody started to use technology. A lot of schools went over to technology. And even if there's filters, those kids are brilliant. So there's issues of addiction to pornography. Very, very serious issue. Addiction to pornography. Just screen addiction, gaming addiction, just being glued to screens. Sometimes kids who are anyway struggling, not having a social life anymore, it exasperates, it intensifies the pain and the brokenness so much more. A kid who was completely healthy and happy, he'll get through it. But a kid who was anyway broken, without that structure, on screens for hours, sometimes all nights, beyond of what the parents know, had and continues to have catastrophic results. And I would say the first thing is, it's very, very important when you could still prevent, to know exactly what's happening in the house in terms of internet, in terms of filters, in terms of screens, in terms of phones. Don't surrender to pressure that is dysfunctional and can ruin children. It's very, very important. Again, every child is different. You have to know who you are, but don't be afraid. Preventive medicine to create standards that will allow them to grow and not to really socially deteriorate, which according to even adults, I see adults, and I'm not excluded, adults are addicted. You can't have a conversation with them. Families don't sit together. We're all addicted. This is a serious problem. You have to learn to put away the phones. We have to learn to connect as people. Connection is the deepest thing. And I would just add one more point, and that is, when we're quarantined, the family relationship becomes more vital than ever. Have dinner together, exercise together, dance together, jog together, play games together, daven together, learn together, go on walks together. Play Monopoly together, play football or frisbee, but bond, connect, talk, eat together, barbecue together, make whatever you could. The bonding between a husband and a wife and the children, the emotional bond between tatis and kinderlach and mommies and kinderlach is probably the most powerful antidote and remedy to combat the adversity that we're all facing.
Reb Daniel, you know, I think ultimately a lot of it has to do with self-confidence. And, you know, we think of the best teacher you had in school. You know, he or she projected a certain image that they were in control and there's nothing that you can do to rattle them. And when you get rattled, you lash out in ways that are not productive. So I know it's hard when you have a child that's struggling, but I think we do have a derech, a path that could make things much better, and try to have the self-confidence in yourself that you're able to get your kids through this. I said a number of years ago, for the first time in public, that I really can tell with pretty good accuracy within 3, 5, 10 minutes of meeting a couple if their child is going to make it or not. And what it usually sounds like is that the parents that come in and they say, we have an issue in our family. We're going to work on this together. What should we do? And they express that they're going to be flexible and they're going to do whatever it takes, and that their love for their child and their love for their children and their family unit is going to supersede everything. Somehow, the vast overwhelming majority of those parents make it. And when I hear parents coming and saying, you know, our first 2, 3 kids are fantastic and everything, and this one, and they project everything on the child, I cringe, because, you know, it usually doesn't end up well. So I just encourage you to be positive. Think of it as a family. Think about doing this together, and that your love for your family is going to get you through this. And try not to blame that child, even though, look, some children are just easy to raise, and some children aren't. That's just the way it is. But do your best. You know, the kids that are sometimes the hardest to raise often turn out to be fantastic adults. I tell parents when they say, I'm tearing my hair out with this kid, I said, be careful. You're going to stay in his house or her house for long periods of time. So, you know, just hang in.
I completely concur. Many times it is the restless spirit that has the greatest potential for accomplishing amazing things in the world.
Right.
We've been discussing the issue of how the pandemic has exacerbated, to many degrees, the ability to maintain one's religious commitments, and some of our youth are disaffected simply because they've been quarantined or cooped up or kept out of the schools and the shuls. So I know, Ms. Josephs, you made reference to this because you said that Project Makom had done a Pesach Seder for a number of people, even amidst COVID. Can you reflect a little bit about how this pandemic has perhaps changed the nature of the way that we should be doing business with our kids and with our youth?
I mean, I can speak, the people that we're reaching are 18 and older, and the people that we're reaching, a lot of them do not have families to go back to. So it's a little bit of a different conversation, but I can just speak to a little bit about what we're seeing. First of all, our rate of signups have doubled since the pandemic started. So we see that sort of connection that we mentioned before, that trauma and difficult, sort of emotional situations kind of maybe forces the issue on religious struggles. So, that's not a surprise at all. One of our most impactful ways to help people that were struggling was with Shabbos placement, finding homes that were full of love and full of non-judgment, and just places to, welcome our members in to be able to just be taken care of. And we can't do that for the most part during the pandemic. And that's really been a very difficult thing, because one thing that we didn't mention before, I would say a lot of the people that we're getting also are very bright, have a lot of great questions. And this is a thing that came up before. Well, what about my bright kid that has a lot of questions that didn't leave? What's the distinction? And I think for the kid that has a lot of questions but has that space and love to ask them, and also sometimes even live with discomfort, but in sort of in a loving, accepted space, they can live with the questions. They can live with challenges in the Torah. They can live with difficulty in halacha, because they just sort of have room to be. When you have that child or that person that has those questions, that great intellect, but has no space to feel loved or to be, that's when they start to, I would say, come out. So, or fall out. So, I would say, it's sort of the parallel to the listeners. If you can be that space, to be of love, of refuge, of space for the child that you may have in your home. I would say that's really the biggest distinction. Our members are lacking that. We normally find them surrogate parents and surrogate families to fill in that gap. But if you are a parent that's listening, that is prepared to, really do anything for your child's health and wholeness, just kind of making your home space as healthy and happy. And sometimes when my family sits around and we just laugh together, like on a Friday night meal, and we're all just giggling about something, I think this is what I think like imprints some of the most positive memories of childhood, that, the family just sat around together laughing and enjoying each other's time and joking together. And that is the stuff, like our members were reflecting about how little laughter was in their home. And some of them said, well, at least on Sukkot in the Sukkah, we had like a glimmer of hope. We sang a song, and then one member said, even on Sukkot, even then, there was never a laugh. So laugh with your family and try to make, good times as much as possible, and be that space and that refuge for them to come home to.
And that's a beautiful way for us to conclude our discussion for today. Again, I want to thank each one of our panelists, Rabbi Yakov Horowitz, Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson, Ms. Allison Josephs. Thank God that we have you as resources, and thank God that we have Amudim to be able to assist you in all of your work, and to be able to help all of those people who are looking for some spiritual connection. And thank you all for listening so much.
Chazak, 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 v'nis chazek.